Hey everybody, I hope you're well. Um, this could be a challenging unit here because normally what I do when I do the avant-garde is, I'll do a little background before a group of filmmakers. We'll watch the films, then we'll discuss them, and then do a background of another group of filmmakers from kind of another movement, and then watch it and discuss it. And that's how the class would have proceeded if we met in person as normal. Unfortunately, we're not, so I'm going to have to kind of give you a bunch of information here, and you're going to watch these films on your own and make your best, the best you can out of it. We're looking at both the European and the American avant-garde. This often gets overlooked in cinema history. The European tends to get focused on more than the American version of this, so I'm glad we're doing both. And one thing to keep in mind is the avant-garde, this is where sort of innovation of cinema happens and migrates into more commercial cinema itself. So you should kind of keep this in mind that whoops, sorry, that this is sort of how it operates, right? The avant-garde is often experimenting with film in many ways, and bits and pieces of it will make itself into kind of commercial, more long-form cinema itself. The first we're going to start with is Impressionism, emerges out of France. One of the most famous adherents of Impressionism at this time, other than Germain Dulac, who you're going to watch a film from, is Jean Renoir, who eventually kind of goes into realism, and you're going to watch a more realist film of his during the late 30s called The Rules of the Game later in the semester. Anyway, Impressionism comes out of France. It's evocative of experiences. It has this thing called photogeny, which is some Germain Dulac in many ways theorizes this, the mystical qualities of capturing unique perceptions of objects. Visual rhythms, optical devices are also in this, such as superimposition, filter, a lot of effects. It's this kind of way where the camera's trying to capture, quote unquote, the personality in the film, right? The ephemeral, something that the film itself brings that other people can't. You're going to be watching The Smiling Madame Boudet from 1923. While watching it, don't just focus on the, impressionistic qualities of what is going on within the film, but also, the thematic issues that might resonate with earlier films you've seen by Lois Weber and Alice Guy Blaché. Moving on, then there's a group of films you're going to watch that are called abstraction, where it's taking these kind of abstract notions and making it relevant to film. You'll notice that this film, usually I have two, but one I couldn't get hold of, unfortunately. But this is much more influenced by the visual arts and the theatrical arts, like painting and stuff. And this is from Michael O'Prea's article I have you reading, or chapter I have you reading from. Right, abstraction is sort of a Platonist notion in which essence of reality was to be taken as abstract geometric forms like circles, cubes, cylinders, spheres. Sorry, there's misspelling there, etc. And kind of revealing the abstract forms existent in reality. So you're going to see one of these early films by Hans Richter called Rhythmus 21. As best you can while watching this film, try to watch it without any distractions. I know that's hard in the time of COVID, and this is where a theater would really help, so you can kind of focus in and sort of in many ways get mesmerized by the images moving here. It's one of my favorite movements, Dadaism. It's more of an anti-art movement actually than a movement. It's really about destroying traditional conceptions of art. You can see it's born in Zurich in 1916 at the Cabaret Voltaire. This is telling it's during World War I, and many expatriates have went to Cabaret Voltaire who don't want to be part of the war. They think it's insane. World War I is a very kind of unjust war. That's why you don't often see much media made about it. It's harder to narrativize in something like World War II. That seems like, oh, well, it's good against fascists and, good against sort of brown shirts, Mussolini's people. So anyway, they went to this place, Cabaret Voltaire, and in many ways started conceptualizing a new type of art movement. Couple things to keep in mind here. It's better to think of Dadaism as a conceptual movement than actually anything they produced. As a matter of fact, they produced art that wouldn't last. So Tristan Zara, who's one of the main proponents of it, would do like word salad poetry, meaning he would take a paper, cut up the words from the paper's page, put it in a hat, throw the words out onto the floor, and then read a poem from that, and then, get rid of the paper itself. They wanted to demystify art and make it just of a moment itself. Similarly, Dadaism has a complete rejection and complete rejection of the rational. If the rational could lead us to war, like World War I, and sort of make the world more mechanized and not really consider people's individuality and feelings, they wanted nothing to do with it. So along those lines too, they reject traditional notions of art, the work of art and the artist, and assault on artistic institutions. The most famous example of this is Marcel Duchamp, who has this art piece called Fountain, which was a urinal that he found somewhere and put a fake artistic name, R. Mutt, and submitted it to an exhibition. When he submitted it, they didn't know it was Marcel Duchamp, who's a really famous painter at the time. They rejected it, saying this is garbage. Why would we want to put a urinal in here? Duchamp then goes, well, wait a minute, I did this, not R. Mutt. Me, Marcel Duchamp, did it. And when they heard that, like, oh, of course we want it. Famous artists, we will definitely take it. And Duchamp called them out. He goes, well, then clearly what matters here is the artist's name, not the art itself. So he called it out for the hypocrisy that was there. The film you're going to see is Return to Reason, by Man Ray, who's a photographer. All these people, I should say, in many ways floated between different mediums, right? There was a sort of amateurishness of them, not in a bad way. This was commissioned by Tristan Tzara, and you'll see how it emphasizes film as a material system, this thing called the rayograph, where Ray would expose negative film and put objects directly onto it and then shoot light through it, so you get a reverse shadow of the objects. You'll catch this in the film, and just notice how chaotic it is, and starts blurring the boundaries of abstraction and real things. I would recommend many of these films to watch more than once, if you can. A little more along this line, a film by Marcel Duchamp called Anemic Cinema. You notice how it's both concerned with giving an illusory sense of depth through this turning wheel, and Dada's concern for nonsensical wordplay going on here. Again, if you can kind of isolate yourself and focus in on this stuff, it would be best. This is hard to watch this stuff in a distracted environment. And honestly, this is really, we should have a large screen to show this stuff. If you're not watching on that, you're going to miss a lot of it. It's not really the same film, but so be it. We're in a pandemic. Ballet Mécanique is the most famous of all these films, perhaps the most well-known. And again, similar to Ray's piece, it's showing how, formal abstraction in the everyday and the mechanical movements. It's a very highly structured film, though it might not seem that way at first. It has sort of Dadaist links here between the high and the low. Charlie Chaplin. It's trying to decontextualize the world in order to see it anew. Surrealism, probably one of the most famous movements, and really kind of subsists until today. If you ever saw Daniel Aronofsky's Mother, the film, I would say it's very deeply a surrealist film. One, to state the obvious, without Sigmund Freud, this movement would not exist. It's really tapping into the unconscious, and Freud, in many ways, popularizes this notion. Surrealism wants to develop the associative powers of the mind, which in their minds have been compromised by materialistic civilization that thinks much more literally about things. And that's sort of a challenge for you all watching these films, because you are all probably literal thinkers in some ways. We've been trained that way in the world, and we have to think more poetically, about these things, and associatively. So surrealists tend to idealize children, the insane, the exotic, people who have not been enculturated into the way of seeing the world that we do. They see reality and the dream as interconnected with one another, mutually influential. This is a famous quote, surrealist quote: "As beautiful as the chance meeting of a dissecting table, of a sewing machine, and an umbrella." It's sort of just weird opposites coming together and forming something new. They in many ways believe in dreams and our unconscious psyche as more important than our external experiences and logic and stuff. You can see an outgrowth of surrealism from Dada. You could argue one wouldn't exist without the other. And probably the most famous of all the films you're going to see, Un Chien Andalou, Andalusian Dog by Louis Buñuel and Salvador Dali. This is interesting. This is, I believe, Michael Price says this. Not an anti-narrative film, but one that plays with narratives. And it'd be interesting to watch how does it do that. I would really like to talk to you all about that. Maybe we'll do that when we meet next week, at most online. But what surrealist themes do we see emerging here? All right, now to the U.S. This group is much more eclectic than often the post-World War II avant-garde that's more known. Stan Brakhage, Maya Day, and Kenneth Anger. They all consider themselves amateurs and don't really believe in the professionalization of the avant-garde. Many of them worked in commercial film, or wrote articles, or worked outside of cinema, and then did this on the side. Eclectic influences from Europe. Not really a defining style to all their work. It's sort of bits and pieces all around. They're part of this little cinema movement that I have you reading about that starts in 26, where these small theaters come around in the US and start showing like sort of major works like Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, along with kind of smaller works itself. None subsist anymore, but they're really kind of interesting. So I had a real kind of access there. Rose Hobart is a surrealist film made by Joseph Cornell and taken from, he repurposes this film called East Borneo, which is this schlocky jungle picture that emphasizes its surreal and beautiful moments. You can watch the whole thing, right? I have it listed here. I only have this timestamp here of sometimes what I watch in class because we didn't have time to watch the whole film, but it's worth checking out. This is, to be quite honest, out of the Americans, this along with one other are my two favorites. I love this film. And the music is actually made for the film that you hear. This film is interesting too. It's sort of playing off of what French surrealists did, where they would go, they didn't really want to see a whole film. They felt films got, narrative cinema got mired down into plot, and they hated plot in many ways. So what they would do is like walk into various cinemas while the film was playing and then walk out and walk into another film like that and sort of catch bits and pieces of the film because they thought you could get more truth out of just sort of various images of the film than a plot. And that's sort of what Joseph Cornell's doing here. He's rearranging East Borneo, so you don't really know the plot, and it's not really important. It's more sort of capturing the beauty of the film itself and sort of the woman who plays the lead in the film. You might recognize this other film, The Fall of House of Usher, obviously a Poe story. This is deeply influenced by German Expressionism, which you watched for this week. So you'll see very kind of parallels between these. This was a huge success in America at the time when it came out, I should say. Played a lot of the little cinemas. This is sort of lesser known. The Life and Death of a Hollywood Extra, right? These are two people who were part of the Hollywood and made these films on the side. Interesting to know, Greg Tolan, the cinematographer, who will eventually do Grapes of Wrath by John Ford, and perhaps most famously, Citizen Kane. He'll be the cinematographer for that. This is an interesting backstory. Douglas Fairbanks, the famous actor, let out his cutting room to edit the film. Chaplin publicized the film by providing home viewings of it. Also very influenced by German Expressionism. It's an indictment of the Hollywood star system, interesting enough, that they all were a part of. This is my other favorite film from the Americans, H2O. Horak mentions that the Americans were much more interested in nature than the Europeans and had much more romantic attitudes towards it. Interesting how this film moves from a natural aesthetic into more abstraction. This is a film particularly that you need to kind of have full concentration on. It's even better when you can watch it in an isolated space on a big screen. I'm really bummed we can't do this here, but better something than not. This also performs a defamiliarizing project like Ballet Mécanique by making things that we see every day strange and seeing it in new ways. And that's it. So I hope you enjoy the films. I look forward to hearing what you have to say, and take it easy.